Demokratie. Europa ist eben viel mehr.
Zusammenarbeit zwischen den Völkern.
Freedom.
Bürger der Europäischen Union.
Giorgia Socratus is on her way into the mountains of Paphos, in the Greek part of Cyprus. She's been driving up here every morning for the past 30 years. We got to know Giorgia, a goat farmer, and her difficult situation more than 10 years ago. She tells us she's been left with all the hard work since her husband left the family. Her husband is a Turkish Cypriot. He lives in the north, she lives in the south. The family is divided, just like the island of Cyprus. Her son Albay, one of 5 children, has been helping her recently. As far as the family's concerned, his father is basically absent. He comes to visit them occasionally. The easing of travel restrictions has made that possible. Until now, all attempts at reunification have failed. Cyprus remains divided. We made a feature report on Cyprus back in 1999. That's when we first got to know Giorgia Socratus. At the time, the island nation was applying for membership in the European Union. Giorgia told us she was worried about the changes EU membership might bring. We brought along the images we made back then and showed them to Giorgia and her son. Giorgia was amused and also a bit moved. Her favourite goat Marula has died since then. Otherwise, not much has changed. Giorgia gets 20 euros in EU subsidies for each goat. But that also means she's had to introduce new hygiene standards to produce her halloumi cheese. She tells us her son will have to modernize, and that his grandmother will give him the money to tile the room where the goats are milked. She says it'll be as European as it's supposed to be. Actually, the entire island has EU membership. But for now, EU laws apply only in the Greek Cypriot part. That widens the gap between the two populations. The fact that Albay Niazi's father is a Turkish Cypriot caused him a lot of trouble, so he attended an international school. He says children of many nationalities were there, British, German and Russian, for instance, but that only the Greeks called him a Turk and teased him for it. On Cyprus, it can be quite complicated to have parents from both ethnic communities. What's changed here since our last visit? In Giorgia's hometown of Paphos, time seems to have stood still. Before the island was divided in 1974, Turkish and Greek Cypriots used to live here peacefully, side by side. Since then, only Greek Cypriots have lived here. The mosque is still deserted. In contrast, the Christian church around the corner is well attended. In the Greek Cypriot south, the Orthodox Church is very influential, also when it comes to the question of reunification. Church leaders have many reservations, but they look for responsibility elsewhere. Father Kyriakos says their archbishop has met the imam from the other side a few times. He thinks the politicians are to blame for the fact that the population still isn't reunited. In 2004, a referendum was held. At the time, a majority of Greek Cypriots rejected reunification. In the same year, the island nation became a member of the European Union. We take a look around the market at Paphos. Here, halloumi is sold to tourists. The euro became the currency in the Greek part of Cyprus in 2008. The vendors complain that everything's become more expensive since then. This woman says everything was better before, and she complains about EU guidelines for stock farming, saying it puts the smallholders at a disadvantage. Outside the old town, we're amazed at how tourism has taken off. In one of the most exclusive hotel complexes on Cyprus, we tracked down the manager, Demetris Demetriou, who studied in Germany. When we last visited him, he was convinced EU accession would be very advantageous to the hotel industry.
Back
then, he told us he expected hotels to profit from the fact that all contracts would be negotiated in euros. He considered the euro to be a stable currency and said its introduction would make it easier for event organizers to calculate their prices. For Demetris, the euro has proved its value. The resort where he now works belongs to an international group.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
With one of Europe's lowest unemployment rates, Cyprus is in good shape. That attracts workers, many of them from Eastern Europe. Demetris now says that EU accession and the good wages the food service industry pays have created a great deal of interest in Cyprus among the newer EU members, those that have entered in the past few years. He says that between 30 and 40% of his personnel comes from those countries.
Unseres Personals kommt von diesen Ländern.
Well-heeled Cypriots like to hold their wedding receptions in Demetris' hotel, but most of his customers come from abroad. Tourism remains one of the island's most important sources of revenue. Demetris' story is like that of many Cypriots. His family comes from the north part of the island and fled to the south after it was divided. Unlike many Greek Cypriots, he supports reunification. Where that's concerned, he's all business. He says that between 2.5 and 2.8 million tourists a year visit Cyprus. Only about 200,000 of them stay in northern Cyprus. He thinks the north could support another 2 million tourists, but doesn't think that will happen unless reunification takes place.
Muss ja erst eine Vereinigung geben, sonst passiert es nicht.
We leave Paphos and travel onwards, on the lookout for signs of change. Our first stop is Pila, a curious village in no man's land. From there, we'll go on to Nicosia, the divided capital, whose wall is beginning to crumble. Finally, we'll visit the Turkish northern part of Cyprus to ask about the prospects of the younger generation. A few kilometers inland, we come upon villages in ruins, testimony to the bloody conflicts that ended in division in 1974. At the time, following a coup by Greek right-wing extremists, Turkish troops occupied the north, and they remain there to this day. Between the two parts of the island lies a buffer zone, neutral territory. And right in the middle of that is Pila. We absolutely wanted to revisit this village, because it's the only place on the island where Greek and Turkish Cypriots have been living side by side since 1974, under the watchful eyes of United Nations troops. On our first visit, UN troops were already in the village, acting as peacekeepers. In the cafes, Turkish and Greek Cypriots sat separately, wary of intermingling. Nowadays, the atmosphere seems friendlier. In the village's only barber shop, a Greek Cypriot customer relaxes while the Turkish barber, Ali Kayfeci, shaves him. 11 years ago, that would have been unthinkable. The customer tells us he has no problem at all with the fact that his barber is Turkish. In fact, Ali isn't even a Cypriot. As he explains, he moved here from Turkey, and people like him are unpopular on both sides of the ethnic divide. Still, Ali assures us he gets along with everyone, and that coexistence between the two ethnic groups in Pila has become very harmonious. He says Greek Cypriots go out to eat and drink with Turkish Cypriots, and that, to his surprise, there aren't any problems. That may well be the diplomatic answer of an outsider doing his best to fit in. In the Café Neon, the cafe, we find out why, despite the rapprochement, Greek Cypriots rejected reunification in a referendum. It has to do with restitution of property. This elderly man told us a solution would be found only if people could return to their old houses and if the Turkish military were to withdraw. That's a very clear position, but without compromise, there's little hope agreement can ever be reached. We arrive in Nicosia, wondering what it's like to live in a city that's been divided for more than 35 years. In 1999, the border was closely guarded, and a nearly impenetrable wall divided the Greek and Turkish sectors. This is Nicosia today. The checkpoint at Ledra Palace, UN headquarters here. We watch as workers and school children stream into the southern part of the city from the Turkish-controlled sector. The border can be crossed without any great formalities. Ledra Street once again links both parts of the city. Once a dead end, it's now a lively shopping thoroughfare. Local residents and tourists have been able to cross the border here since 2008. Nonetheless, time and again we come across the ruins of buildings, barricades and barbed wire. The demarcation line snakes right through the center of the capital. In a cafe on neutral territory, we meet two journalists, Greek Cypriot Andreas Parasos and Turkish Cypriot Sevgül Uludağ. Both consider the end of division to be of prime importance.
These guys are killing me tonight.
We ask Andreas, who edits the liberal newspaper Kathimerini, why it hasn't happened yet.
The climate is made by the politicians. If they have a meeting and they both come out and they say, oh, there's no hope, then people go, okay, let's live separately.
We ask Sevgül Uludağ if she thinks the European Union could do something.
Things together, because EU is not a confrontational institution. It likes to leave things to time. So the biggest pressure, of course, should be put on Turkey, because Turkey has changed the population structure in the northern part of Cyprus. It has virtually outnumbered Turkish Cypriots living on the island. But I don't think that EU will pressure Turkey on this issue.
She implies that the unresolved Cyprus problem is convenient for some member states, supplying a pretext for opposing Turkey's accession to the EU. It's the Cypriots themselves who have to break the stalemate. We accompany Sevgül to a meeting on the search for people who went missing during the violent conflict. Many were buried anonymously in mass graves. Their relatives are still hoping they might return. Sevgül researches such cases and shows people there are victims in both ethnic communities. On this particular evening, the ethnic political conflict becomes emotionally tangible to us for the first time. It's good to hear that there's a willingness for reconciliation among former enemies. This Greek Cypriot, sole survivor of a massacre, says Cypriots themselves have the choice to take revenge or to look at history and find out why it happened. He tells us he decided to think and learn. Sevgül explains that until a few years ago, events like this were impossible.
We were a big target because we were insisting on doing bicommunal activities, and we were attacked, we were thrown out of our jobs, we were made unemployed, not because we were stupid, but because we were saying that yes, we can live together with Greek Cypriots. That's a sin in Cyprus, especially in the north. So now that the checkpoints are open, it allows us to do such activities all over Cyprus.
The next day, we cross the line into the northern part of Nicosia. Most people on the street seem to be Turkish immigrants. There are now said to be some 90,000 in northern Cyprus. The Cypriots view them distrustfully. Many of them are ill-educated and ultra-religious. Their family structures patriarchal, a new potential for conflict. In a quiet district, we discover an artist's studio. Zehra Sonia is a sculptress who uses her work to take a critical look at her country's turbulent history. Life behind barbed wire has left a profound mark on the population. That's the focus of her art. And now new problems have appeared.
Göçmenlerin buraya gelmesiyle birlikte
She tells us the immigration of Turks has brought cultural and social erosion. She says violent crime has risen dramatically, as has the incidence of rape. She says that hadn't happened before, and that people are shocked. Zehra Sonia earns extra money teaching art, and she's active in projects that bring together artists from north and south. But she's cut off from the international art market. She complains that there are very few art centres, galleries or museums in northern Cyprus. It's different in the south, she says, where there's an international exchange among artists, even partially supported by EU funding. Unfortunately, on the Turkish part of the island, that hasn't been the case so far. The fact is that the EU's influence ends where the Turkish north section begins. We wanted to know what young Turkish Cypriots think of that, and made an appointment to meet a student, Baran, in a cafe. Here people pay not in euros, but in Turkish lira. 21-year-old Baran studies business administration. He says it wouldn't be that advantageous to have the euro in the north, because everything would become more expensive. But he thinks being part of the EU is important for the country to give it more opportunities. Perhaps he's also thinking about his own future. He'd like to be able to continue his studies abroad. Every morning, Baran and a classmate drive to university in Gazi Mağasa, or Famagusta, an hour-and-a-half's drive from Nicosia. He's enrolled at Eastern Mediterranean University. Classes are conducted in English.
Do you need some time to study? No. Yes?
We're surprised. Not only are there many students from Turkey in the seminars, but also from African countries. They pay tuition fees, providing important funding for the university. Baran and his friends are fed up with being cut off from Europe and living in what's called the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, recognized only by Turkey. Baran points out that the economy here is in bad shape. He says we should be members together with the South. His friend puts it more emphatically. He says Turkish Cypriots are dependent on Turkey and can't run their country themselves, engage in trade or develop professionally. He's pessimistic about the future. He thinks only EU membership can help, stressing that unless the Greek Cypriot embargo is rescinded, there won't be peace here. To illustrate the embargo's effect on northern Cyprus, Baran takes us to Gazi Mauza harbour, once the island's main port. As a shipping agent, his uncle Mustafa Denizen knows how absurd the situation is. All merchandise has to be imported and exported via the Turkish mainland. He describes how his company picks up 50 to 100 containers a day in Turkey. Because northern Cyprus produces scarcely anything itself, the ships usually return empty. That, he says, is expensive and annoying. He adds that if no agreement is reached, their future will be completely uncertain. The North's economic underdevelopment is frustrating. We can see only one advantage. There's still plenty of unspoilt countryside here. But the desire for prosperity has also triggered a building boom on the north coast. Right up to the foothills of the mountains, every last piece of property has been built up and sold off to foreigners. Our next destination is Girne. In 1999, it was a sleepy spot. Very few tourists wandered into the Turkish part of the island back then. Nowadays, Girne is the centre of tourism in northern Cyprus. Bar after bar lines the harbour. In a restaurant, we come upon our artist from Nicosia. Zehra Sonia grew up in Girne after her family fled the south. She's uneasy about the changes the past years have brought.
İnsan kendi yerinde kendine yabancılaşmayla karşı karşıya kalıyor. Ve bambaşka size.
She complains that the burgeoning tourism and immigration mean people see their own country slowly and steadily losing its own identity. And she finds that a painful experience. The numerous casinos also bother Zehra. Gambling is banned in Turkey and southern Cyprus, so Girne has become a bastion of the gambling mafia and of prostitution. At the end of our journey, we want to know what Zehra Sonia hopes for the future. She says she believes everyone yearns for peace, but somehow never seem to reach an agreement. And she thinks it'll certainly be a long time coming. As she puts it, We have to learn to live with each other in an entirely new way.
Bir formatta belki yaşamayı tekrardan öğrenmesiyle ilişkili bir şey.
We leave with mixed feelings. The island nation seems more contradictory than ever. We're dismayed by the seemingly hopeless political situation. Still, it's touched us to meet people who are committed to and ready for reconciliation. And we wonder whether the people of divided Cyprus will ever make their way together again.
Thank you.